Sam Shankland is having a pretty extraordinary year. At the end of April, he won the US Championship ahead of Caruana, Nakamura and So. And then almost straight afterwards, he went on to the Capablanca Memorial Tournament in Cuba, which he won by 1.5 points, and that was a very strong field. And just recently, he's been playing in the American Continental Open in Montevideo in Uruguay. And this is also a strong tournament, strong open tournament. A lot of competition, players really going for it because the top 4 places would qualify for the next World Cup tournament that takes place in 2019. That's a big prize. Now, going to the last round, Sam Shankland shared the lead with the player from Argentina, Diego Flores. Big competition. Who could score best in that last round? So let's have a look at Sam Shankland's game. He was playing Thomas Sosa, who's rated, well, about 250 points below him, 24.53. But, well, you still got to beat him. Still a decent player. So Shankland with white, and so far everything normal. And here, after knight c3, black has quite a big choice. You can play bishop e7, perhaps a queen's gambit, c5. You can take on c4. You can play bishop b4, which is the Ragozin variation, which is very respectable. And instead of bishop g5 or taking on d5, Shankland goes for queen b3, which is, well, of course, it's been played in a lot of games. Excuse me a second. But to my eyes, there's something just a little bit funny about getting the queen out early. The main move here is c5 to exploit the fact that white just for a moment has neglected his development and attacking white's centre. You can also play knight c6 in that position. But Sosa plays a5 here, and that is a little bit unusual. But there was a fairly recent game where white played bishop g5 and then c5 and knight a6. Now that's the idea, that the bishop is defended and so the knight can capture on c5 straight away. That bishop's protected. And here black gets fantastic play actually, and black ended up winning that game. But Shankland played in a much more pragmatic way. He just played a3, putting the question to the bishop. He wants to know, what's it up to? And here, well, black retreated the bishop, and I think that's really backing down. I think if you're going to justify the way black plays here, you have to take on c3 and use the time you've gained to try and get some kind of initiative. So, for example, this isn't too bad for black. Just develop quickly and play b6, and at least black is a little bit ahead in development. But of course white has 2 bishops, and well, we have an interesting fight on our hands. But instead black played bishop e7, and now I feel this really is backing down, and white is ahead in development to some extent, although it's slightly complicated by the fact that the queen is on b3. But it feels like white is doing pretty well at this stage. So it's kind of a normal queen's gambit position, but these moves could be useful. And, well, is a5 useful, or does it just create weaknesses? We're about to find out. b6, so the normal queen's gambit move, looking to develop this bishop. Rook c1, and this exploits the fact that, well, that c-pawn is left at home a little bit backward. And pawn takes d5. This looks like a very natural way for white to play the position. And now Shankland just traded everything off. Queen's attacked, so bishop c4 gets in the way. And this is difficult. If black were to trade, then you can see enormous pressure here, and you don't want to play something like this. Well, this is probably going to lose a pawn straight away, actually. You could play c6 and trying to hold things, but again, white just has a huge initiative here. Bishop c7 is already very strong and just castles. To my eyes, the best move is c5, and just accept that you have a weakness, a weak c-pawn, but this might not be so bad for black, because it's at the moment it's hard to attack that, and maybe later on black can hope to get counterplay by attacking the b-pawn. But instead, black took the knight on f3, and this is the kind of exchange that I think, well, I would love to see as white. You've got two bishops, and that central pawn structure, that clump, is incredibly powerful. Double pawns don't matter because they're all together, they're not really weak. And the g file opens as well. And something else, after bishop d6, well, you don't need to trade, you can drop the bishop to g3. And if black were to trade, then that opens the h file. It's a beautiful central pawn mass. So knight d7 played, and now, well, you could just play the king to the middle. You've got to watch out for e5, but Shankland plays, I think, very well here. First of all, repositioning the bishop, so preventing any e5s at the moment because of the exchange on d7, and also, maybe looking to play bishop c6. So the knight moved on. Now king e2. The king is actually quite safe on e2 behind this pawn mass, and you never know when white may be able to use these open files on the king side. Knight h5. Well, we don't want to trade here because after this, well, you get rid of this backward pawn. I still prefer white in this position actually, but you can see the queen might have a square here. The pawn may come to d5. I think black certainly has found his feet there. So after knight h5, what did Shankland play? Well, you could play bishop c6 here. It's not a bad square. But instead he played rook c6. Very interesting. So he could be looking simply to move the other rook over and then maybe trade and start attacking these pawns. That's possible. So that's why black exchanged off knight for bishop. And that means at least that this bishop holds the weak pawn on c7. However, white gained something by this trade, of course, that the h-file is now open for the rook. And those pawns are just looking really powerful. If we could advance that, then that would completely clamp black in the middle of the board. You wouldn't be able to free yourself with e5. So for example, queen g5, I think f4 is just a good move here. And black is going to get squashed. That's why black played e5, hoping to break out. And black does to a certain extent, but of course there are drawbacks with this move, that now this diagonal is open. Remember, white's the only one with a light squared bishop. If black could magically place a bishop on one of these squares, then that wouldn't be so bad. But this is a very different situation. So these light squares are potential avenues for the white attack. Bishop d3, now that is a very tricky move indeed. And there are other ways to play this position, but it's clear that the bishop has done its job on b5. And playing the bishop to d3 puts the question to black. The h-pawn is attacked. Now what would you do? Would you play h6, and that means all those light squares are really weak? Or would you play g6? And, well, we're going to see there are certain drawbacks to that move. Of course, f5 is completely impossible. It's against the rules of chess because there's a pin. Well, let's have a quick look at h6. This was not played. Here, white has a couple of promising ways to play. One is to drop the bishop back to b1 to make room for the queen, and it's very difficult for black to block that diagonal when the rook is looking at the pawn here. So something like this, and queen c2. And you can move into h7, but it's actually not fatal for black because the queen comes to f6 and the king can hide on e7. But even here, just king f3, and this is a really attractive position for white. Remember that rook here on the h-file might swing up the board. You have possibilities to play g4, g5 to open things up. Maybe swing the rook to f5 as well. Nice position. So that's one way of playing. Another way is just to play f4, push the bishop back, and then queen c2. And if queen f6, let's push with e4 and play e5. If queen e7, okay, let's push the king out of the way. Let's give a check. And play g4 and go for g5 and well, probably not g6, but certainly g5 to open up the h-file. So I can understand why black backed away from that and he played g6, but this makes life very easy for white because now you can actually calculate through to a forced win. First moves are not difficult. So we can take on g6. So we've given up a piece. Obviously the rook is immune because of the pin and the bishop has to go in the way. And now you just have to see one good move here, and that's rook h4 with the idea of rook g4 and, well, there's no defense. White is just going to win the piece back and that's game over. Now there is a little bit of trickery that black has on the other side of the board. So watch out for potentially a rook coming into the game here. But actually, Shankland plays it very cool here. He's obviously calculated this out. You could play queen c4, but queen a2 just avoids mess. And if rook a5, then just rook g4. Queen d7 played. And now rook g4 anyway. Queen check. Now, Shankland would have had to just make sure that these checks are going nowhere. And if there's another check, the king is going to run around to g2 with complete security. So rook d8. White takes on g7, check. And the rook comes back to g5. Well, this looks rather nasty for black. The queen's attacked and checkmate is threatened. So black needs something very quick here, and he played rook d1. Now this gives up the rook, but it's not too difficult to calculate that in fact white's king can escape these checks. If this is taken, then the king will just run up the board, and after rook check, simply interposing with a rook is good enough. And the game ended like this. King ran up the board, and after f5 check, actually, well, black played this and resigned, or possibly lost on time, I don't know. Anyway, the game score ends here. It's very easy. You just need to do a little bit of calculation. Of course, not king takes pawn, then queen check, and rook takes, and all bets are off. But instead, just sidestep with king f4. This rook's on prise. If rook takes rook, then you can be greedy and end up a whole rook up. No complications, and mate follows shortly. So with that win, Sam Shankland actually won the tournament on his own because his rival Diego Flores only drew in the last round. So he won the tournament by half a point. What an incredible record. He's won 3 tournaments in a row. US Championship, Capablanca Memorial, and now the American Continental. And that means he qualifies for the World Cup in 2019. His live rating now goes up to 2727, crashed through that barrier, and he's now number 27 in the world. What an extraordinary run he's had. You know, for a few years, for about 2 or 3 years, he was sort of bumping along the 2660 level. Of course, very strong player, but he couldn't make that breakthrough. Looks like he's done it now. You can see some interviews with Sam that we did in Biel and in the Tromsø Olympiad, where he had a gold medal winning performance. If you look in the info button up there and also in the video description, and you'll see a Sam Shankland playlist as well.